IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday, November 1st. We have turned over the calendar to a new month, and this is a huge month for Notre Dame. Notre Dame will play two teams in this final month that are currently ranked in the top 10 of the national rankings. Now, we'll find out if they're both in the top 10 when the college football playoff ranking comes out tonight. We'll certainly have plenty to say about that, but for now, they do have two top 10 teams in the rankings. And the first one is this Saturday when Notre Dame hosts the Clemson Tigers, the number 5 in the country Clemson Tigers, who are an undefeated 8-0. They've bounced back from last season's kind of down 10-3 season, right? As I've joked before, there's a lot of teams that would like to be 10-3 and have that be called a down season. So Notre Dame faces this tough test. They have a lot of opportunity in front of them. We talked last night. Sean and I did last night. Ryan and Sean talked yesterday about the huge recruiting opportunity this weekend. Sean and I talked last night about the big game opportunity. So today, we want to kind of dive into the breakdown of Clemson. And so today, we're going to kind of give you sort of a high level, just an overview of who Clemson is. We'll talk about their statistics. We'll talk about how they got here. We'll talk a little bit about their offense and defense, show you some stuff just to give you a basic feel of kind of who they are, how we think they're going to defend Notre Dame in some different areas, talk about what we like, what we think Notre Dame can exploit, and, just give you an idea of why this Clemson team is maybe not as good as past Clemson teams, but still why they're undefeated, why they find ways to win week after week after week. The team that used to blow people out week after week after week is now having to grind out victories. Two reasons. Clemson's not as good as they were a couple years ago, and the ACC is getting better. That's the other reason for this. So we're going to break down why that is, but also explain why they are still a very tough matchup for Notre Dame. And so that is what we're going to do today, Ryan. But look, no, Ryan, this is not a Clemson team that is good as 2015 or 16 or 18, but make no mistake, this is a really good college football team that Clemson and Dabo Swinney are going to put on the field on Saturday.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a team that, just over the last few years, Brian, yes, maybe it's not as good as it was 2-3 years ago at this point, right? But it's still one of those programs that when you're talking about who are the top of college football outside of the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, obviously Clemson is one of those teams that have kind of, supplanted a lot of programs and been at the upper echelon of college football. So a great test for Notre Dame. A big home game for Notre Dame. We've talked about Notre Dame's struggles at home so far this year, but you have an opportunity to play a top 5 team in your home stadium. Potential big for momentum, obviously building down the stretch of the season. And this is one of those teams that, in order to vault to the top of college football, Clemson's one of the teams that you have to defeat, and that's one of the teams that you have to eventually get by. And this is obviously going to be a big test for not only how much development the team has had over the course of the year, but also how have the coaches kind of differentiated their teaching and developed as play callers, as leaders. There's going to be a lot of things on the line in this week against Clemson.
Ryan, let's kind of dive into the Clemson Tigers, and let's kind of give a little bit of an overview of how they got here. Obviously, we have first of all, a sort of a opponent insider first glance look on the site at irishbreakdown.com. You can check that out. It's part of the free site. And Clemson got here. They're 8-0. They bounced back again from a 10-3 season last year. They won a game to start the season in Atlanta over Georgia Tech 41-10. Game was closer for a while. They put it away late. They beat Furman 35-12, beat Louisiana Tech 48-20. Went on the road, beat Wake Forest 51-45 in 2 overtimes. It was a game that Clemson dominated early. Wake Forest charged back in the second half, but the Tigers won it in overtime. Beat NC State at home 30-20. Went on the road to beat Boston College 31-3. Then went back on the road and beat Florida State 34-28. And then their most recent game was 2 weeks ago when they beat Syracuse at home 27-21. I've had people tell me, Ryan, that Clemson hasn't beaten anybody this year, and I'm like, I think there's too many people that are assuming things about what the ACC was and not giving enough credit for what the ACC is. Is the ACC a juggernaut? No, it is not. Is the ACC a lot better than it has been in recent years from a depth standpoint? Absolutely. Florida State's not ranked, but they went on the road and beat Florida State. Florida State has a win over an LSU team that's now 6-2 and ranked in the top 25. Florida State outplayed them for 60 minutes, and Clemson outplayed Florida State for 60 minutes. It was a 34-28 game, Ryan, but it wasn't really that close. Florida State scored a touchdown with like 2 minutes left to make it 34-28. I think at one point in time, Clemson had a 31-14 lead in that game. They beat an NC State team that is now in the top 25. They beat Wake Forest on the road, who's in the top 25. And, of course, they beat Syracuse, who's in the top 25. So they've played 4 teams this year that either are ranked or have been ranked at some point in time, and they're 4-0 against them. So they have earned their 8-0 record. They have earned their top 5 ranking. I mean, their resume, if you look at how good teams are this year and not get obsessed with what you think teams are or what you think a conference is, their resume is far more impressive to me right now than Michigan's. Michigan has 1 good win all year. That's it. They've played a lot of nothing after Penn State, whereas Syracuse has played Clemson is half of their schedule at some point in time this year has been ranked in the top 25. So they've certainly earned this number 5 ranking in my view.
No, they're a really talented team, Brian. I mean, obviously, we're going to go in depth throughout the week as far as the caliber of players that they've been consistently able to recruit at certain positions. There's been other positions that maybe they haven't recruited quite as well as they need to in certain spells. But, I mean, the offense just in a whole is a lot better than it was last year. I mean, last year it was putrid for the large majority of the season. Offense has improved, and one thing that I'll tell you about Clemson is defensively, they have several guys in that front 7 that are going to be first round to second round NFL draft picks. So this is a talented football team, folks. It's a well-coached team, at least from the top. And, obviously there's been some mixed results from the coordinator positions after losing, your coordinators this offseason, but talent is not an issue at Clemson. Certain spots, perhaps, but I mean, I think you can see just the year-to-year draft results and all-American lists and all that type of stuff to know that Clemson's going to have a lot of talent. So it is obviously a test this week for Notre Dame.
So let's dive in a little bit to Clemson, look at them from a statistical standpoint. We are going to pull them up here real quick and let you all take a peek at that. This is sort of part of the first breakdown that we look at. Obviously, Clemson is not the offensive juggernaut they have been in the past, but they're certainly better than where they were last year. Their offense was really bad last year, was a middle-of-the-road to lower-level ACC team last season. This year, they're better, but again, you have to take into context these numbers are against a schedule where half the opponents they've played this year are ranked in the top 25 or have been ranked in the top 25. So that has to be taken into account as well. The rushing numbers are okay. They have been more of a grinded out ground attack as opposed to a big play rushing attack, which they were in the past. Their passing yards are middle of the road to bottom of the level in the conference. Third down and red zone offense is very good. And then their turnovers, they've only turned the ball over 9 times in 8 games. They turned it over, I think, 3 times against Syracuse, which is part of the reason Syracuse is in that game. What makes Clemson good is the fact that they're a good situational football team. And that's really what it comes down to. They're not a big play offense like they've been in the pass game. They're not a big play offense like they've been in the run game. But they're a grinded out team that's efficient, that moves the chains on third down, that when they get into the red zone, as you can see, the red zone number that I put there was the touchdown ratio. They're second in the conference in red zone offense from a touchdown standpoint. So they just finish drives, and they don't score the way that they used to, but they score a decent amount still. And then defensively, honestly, they haven't been as good as they've been in the past overall. But I will say this, I think they're better than they were early. I think their pass defense, if you look at the numbers, the overall passing yards, they rank 12th in the conference out of 14 teams. I think that's a tad misleading. And why I say that is I think it's misleading from the standpoint of, number one, they had a bad game against Wake Forest. They got torched by Wake Forest through the air. But it's also misleading because teams just a lot of times don't even try to run on them. And so I think that's a part as well. And then when you look at, if you're losing and you can't run on them anyway, you're going to throw the ball. And so that factors into it as well. I will say this, Ryan, you gave up 259 yards passing to Furman. They gave up 311 to Louisiana Tech. They gave up 337 and 6 touchdown passes to Wake Forest. But since then, their pass defense has gotten a lot better. 245 to NC State, 220 to Boston College, 254 against Florida State. But that came off of 42 pass attempts. And then, of course, 167 against Syracuse after giving up 6.5, 7.2, and 11.6 yards per attempt in games 2 to 4. The last 4 games, they've given up 5.1, 5.2, 6.0, and 6.4 yards per attempt, which is very good. So their secondary can be beat, but they have gotten a lot better as the season has worn on from where they were early in the season when they really struggled against several teams in a row coming out in September.
Yeah, I mean, they've gotten a ton better, Brian, because, I mean, this, again, to your point, this isn't the typical Clemson secondary that we've seen over the years, right? Like, there's no A.J. Terrell back there. There's no Andrew Booth. There's no that caliber of football player, Darian Kendrick. Like, there's just not those guys as far as more finished commodities. There's still talent there, but most of it, aside from Sheridan Jones, is pretty young. You know, I mean, you're looking at Andrew Makuba as a sophomore as kind of one of your most experienced players coming into this season, right? So I think you're sitting there and you're just saying, you know, there was talent certainly on the back end, but it just is a talent that hasn't played a ton in a lot of areas on the back end. But now that they're playing at a higher level, when you now combine that with a defensive line that has future NFL or has a really talented second level of the defense, when those things all start kind of peaking at the right times, I think that's when you're going to see, and what you are seeing, that Clemson's defense is going to start to be a lot better down the stretch here. So I do agree. I think it's a lot improved. I mean, after that Wake Forest game, I was kind of like, oh man, this is not good. It's not a good secondary at all, but they have recovered. They've been a whole lot better. And offensively, it's very interesting because I think the biggest key for them, Brian, is like last year, I didn't think they ran the ball very well or efficiently, I should say. I think this year they have been a lot more efficient than they were at least last season. I think that you've seen step forwards, obviously, with Will Shipley and the offensive line being a little bit of a better run blocking unit than it was last year. But I think that it's ultimately going to be a good test because where Notre Dame has its strengths, I think that Clemson has a lot of strengths to counteract that, which I think makes it a really interesting kind of matchup here for Notre Dame.
Absolutely. And so when you look at this Clemson football team, obviously statistically not the dominant force that they've been in the past, but also a team that is certainly capable of coming into Notre Dame Stadium and beating Notre Dame. So I think when you break this game down, we'll start kind of looking at the offense and just giving you a taste of who they are offensively. And Clemson is a heavy 11 personnel team. They will do some different things. They'll line up in some 12 personnel. They have a lot of tight ends. 2 of their tight ends are Davis Allen, and I'm drawing a blank on how to say the other kid's name. Let's see here. I'm going to try to sound it out. It's Jake Brenningstool, I believe. But their tight ends are 2 of their top 5 pass catchers. And then Will Shipley's also a guy that will catch the ball a lot as well. So even though they are 11 personnel team, they throw the ball to the tight end a good amount. When you look at Davis Allen, he's their number 3 receiver with 20 catches for 265 yards. Brenningstool has 15 catches for 163 yards. So between the 2 tight ends, that's 35 catches for 468 yards. That's a good amount of production for especially for Clemson, who's not a team that really since Jordan Leggett hasn't really been a huge throw the football to the tight end team with any consistency. So certainly a part of it. And you've seen them twice in games this year just go right down the seam. I think they hit Davis Allen right down the seam, like right at the start of the Syracuse game. I think early on against Wake Forest, they hit Brenningstool up the seam for a big play. They turned him loose on a seam route. So you've got to be careful with them because not only will they throw to him, but they'll throw it down the field to him. And try to get your linebackers in some matchups. We haven't seen a lot of teams do that to Notre Dame's defense this year and take advantage of Notre Dame's lack of length, the mic or at will, when certain looks are there. Because you haven't played a lot of teams that have 6'5", 6'6" tight ends, which is what Clemson has. So that's certainly a matchup to consider. But I want to dive into, again, 11 personnel is their base look. That is a lot of what they like to do. Offensively, they like to spread you out. We're going to show a couple looks here real quick of just Clemson and their base offense. This is a clip from the Wake Forest game. You can see 2 receivers to the bottom of the screen, a tight end, and actually I think this might even be this is the tight end I believe is outside. This is 11 personnel. They like to spread the field. This is actually one of the more condensed looks you're going to see from them when it comes to playing tight to the line of scrimmage. They want to get guys in space, and that's how they want to get their run game going. They'll also do a lot of 3-by-1 looks, which you can see here. You'll see the tight end is the number 3 guy to the bottom of the screen. You've got 2 receivers. You have a receiver at number 1, receiver number 2, and then a receiver backside at number 1. And that's another 11 look, because what they want to try to do is they want to try to get defenses to take these players and get them out of the box, or to widen the box to try to create more room to run. If you start getting too wide out here with your safeties, they will do things where they'll get the tight ends up the seams and do things like that. And now, Ryan, they haven't done this a ton, but this is an example of them going 21 personnel, because they will play 2 running backs a lot. Obviously, Will Shipley is their starter. He's their guy. But Phil Maffa will play a lot. He's got 283 rushing yards in the season. They'll put these 2 together. Well, they'll then use one of them to run block for the other one. They'll run out of this. They'll run sweeps out of this. They'll also throw out of this a lot, where Shipley sort of becomes a weapon out of the backfield and Maffa will stay in and pass protect. So they'll throw some different stuff at you. They'll do some 12 personnel with the tight ends attached. They'll do some 12 personnel with the guy lined up. So they'll do some wide bunch out of 3-by-1. But for the most part, Ryan, the goal of this Syracuse offense is to spread you out, try to create running lanes inside. And if you get too tight to defend the run, then they will pull the ball and throw a lot of RPOs. And that's going to be a big part of what they do as well.
Biggest difference from last season to this season, Brian, like I already said, right? It's their ability, I think, to establish a more cohesive and efficient running game. I mean, you mentioned Will Shipley, you mentioned Phil Maffa, very different football players. Obviously, Shipley's more around 205 pounds-ish. He's got kind of that all-purpose look to him. And then you have a Phil Maffa who's 230 pounds, which is why he's able to do some of the blocking stuff you talked about. But passing-wise, they want to work off of that running game. They're going to run a lot of RPO. They're going to run a lot of pay action. You mentioned how the tight ends are used in the passing game. That's because when the running game is going, they're easily able to manipulate the second-level defenders and get some easy stuff down seams, get some easy RPO action. That's how this team wants to function. So I think the running backs have both had nice seasons, especially Will Shipley, obviously, but that's where their bread is buttered, man. They want to run the football, they want to run efficiently, and everything else is going to work off of that action.
So I'm going to show an RPO clip here real quick to kind of point out what Ryan is talking about there. They are going to run a lot of RPO looks. Now, they run a lot of traditional RPO looks. Hey, Ryan, I left you a quick note. So they're going to run a lot of RPO action. They'll do a lot of the typical RPO. So, for example, out of this look, they'll run like bubble screens here where he'll block, and they'll just run a bubble screen there. They'll run a lot of typical stuff. They'll do like now screens. He'll kind of come block there, and then he'll catch it there. They'll run tunnel screens out of this look as well. But this look right here is a play they ran against Wake Forest that I think is really where Notre Dame has to be concerned. It's an area where Notre Dame has had some vulnerability this season at times, and it's an area where Clemson has given them some issues in the past. And so what this is an RPO look that Clemson will run that is more of a vertical downfield RPO type of action. So they do the bubble screen here. And so this is called, right? So they'll line up and they'll call this. And so what happens is if this defender here is, let's say he's not there, and let's say he's here, kind of splitting the difference, they may pull that RPO and throw it outside. But on this particular play against this alignment, Wake Forest has got pretty good numbers. You've got 2 over 2. This guy is here, so they've got pretty good numbers. And then backside, you've got this safety has crept down in the box, okay? So there really is no backside help. You see the corner's got his butt to the sideline, which means he is now going to try to play the post. So what happens is they run the bubble screen here to this look, and then this guy gets inside and runs a post. And then DJ, the quarterback, is going to read that backside safety. So he's going to read that guy. And so they're running an inside zone here. If this guy stays back or drops, and he'll just hand off on the inside zone because they've got a decent box numbers, right? They've got six defenders in the box, and Clemson has 6 blockers. So you've got the 5 offensive linemen plus the tight end. So they're good in the box. Where they get in trouble from a box standpoint is if this safety comes into the box and they don't have anybody to count for him. So that is on the quarterback. That is the quarterback's man. That is the RPO read if he's going to look on that side. Now, on this particular play, this safety came down on the run action, and so DJ pulls it. The receiver got in front of, because they have two big outside receivers. The receiver gets in front. I believe this is Joseph Ngata, who's 6'4". They also have Bo Collins, who's a 6'4", 6'5" guy. So they will throw the ball and just throw it high and let him go out, play smaller corners. And this would be a matchup against Benjamin Morrison. Clemson's going to want that. But they hit this post route right here for a big play. And you will see them run that. And you will also see them do some things off this. I've seen them do RPOs where instead of the post, they'll just run a go route. Same concept. If this guy comes down, he'll just pull and take the one-on-one shot outside. And obviously, if you play off of it, they'll just bang the comeback route outside of that as well. So RPOs is definitely something that Notre Dame is going to have to be concerned about when they're defending Clemson. That requires discipline. And so what you've seen from Clemson this year is, they're really not a great move the ball consistently up and down the field team. They're really not. They're not like they used to be. They don't have the efficiency that they used to have. They don't have just the overall just dynamic ability to just make plays in space the way that they used to. They have guys that can make plays in space, but it's not like they used to have. And so what happens is you get in these situations where when they've been able to give teams problems, the issue is that you give up a big play. So, for example, you were in a matchup against, I'm trying to think who it was. I believe it was NC State. I believe it was where, guy just it might have been, it was Florida State. Guy just, coming off the line, they're running sort of a post-snap action, and the guy just kind of loses track of Antonio Williams and just lets him run by him, and then bam, big play touchdown. And, that hurt Florida State because they weren't running the ball. They weren't moving the ball consistently well. If you look at Clemson's offense against Wake Forest, they put up 559 yards of offense, and then they put up 521 against Louisiana Tech, who, honestly, they're not very good on defense. Louisiana Tech gives up 39.6 yards per game this year, and their defense gives up 476 yards per game. They went for 521. So, not great performances, but outside of that, they didn't have over 400 yards of offense in any game the rest of the year until Syracuse, and a lot of that came late in the game. So what happens is, and we saw this against Syracuse as well, is they are a team that will get big plays, and a lot of it comes from a lack of discipline, and that's kind of what we talked about, the RPO. So Clemson did a nice job of kind of keeping it, NC State did a nice job of kind of keeping Clemson in check, and then all of a sudden, bad run fits, and DJ takes and pulls it out and runs 38 yards to set up a late second quarter touchdown. So if you can avoid those type of things and make Clemson consistently move the ball up and down the field, then you've got a chance to keep them in check. What you cannot do is allow them to rip off the big plays. Syracuse gave up too many big plays. That ultimately did them in. Florida State gave up too many big plays. And it wasn't a lot of big plays. It was just enough to spark them to be able to score the kind of points that they need to win the game. Because if you look at a lot of their games, people say, well, this game was close, that game was close. They were competitive games, but they weren't really close games. NC State, they beat by 10, but NC State never really threatened them. And so that's just kind of where Notre Dame is going to have to do, is eliminate the big plays. That's been a problem for Notre Dame this year. So that's certainly something that Notre Dame is going to have to focus on this game. Offensive line-wise, they have a big physical offensive line. Well, I should say they have a big and strong offensive line. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily really physical. And we've seen offenses like this before from Notre Dame. You look at their offensive line across the board. Left tackle Jordan McFadden is 6'2", 305. He's their smallest guy. Left guard Marcus Tate is 6'5", 325. Their center Will Putnam is 6'4", 315. Their right guard, Walker Parks, is 6'5", 315, and they have a true freshman at right tackle, Blake Miller, who's 6'6", 315. He is probably their most physical lineman. He's an Ohio kid, really big physical kid, not a great athlete, but long, sound fundamentals for a kid his age, and he's very strong. He's probably their most physical guy. They're more technique and scheme. They're strong, but they don't really come off with a lot of fire. I think a key for Notre Dame is going to be use your athleticism like you did against Syracuse to beat them, win the leverage battle, and win the battle off the ball. Beat them into gaps, beat them off the ball. That's going to be a big key against the Syracuse offensive line. And then, of course, on the perimeter, they've got a nice mix of speed and size. And I think that's something where you're going to have to look at this matchup and say, hey, look, this is where Notre Dame is going to have an opportunity to, make some. They're not a speed team, but they are a team that is more than willing to throw it up. Notre Dame's going to have to put the quarterback into some positions where DJ is not comfortable in the pocket. You can't let him get settled, because if he's comfortable, he'll be accurate. What Syracuse did a nice job of is, even though Clemson was moving the ball on Syracuse, they were able to have success because they were able to limit just his comfort level, and they were able to force him into some mistakes because they were able to get pressure on him. That's going to be a big key for Notre Dame as well. You're not as big as them, so don't try to be as big as them. Just go out there and be physical and take it to them that way. That's going to be a big, big key for Notre Dame in this matchup against the Clemson offense, because, again, it's not a really fast Clemson offense. They're like Notre Dame. They've got some fast guys, but they don't have the speed that they used to have. I would argue that Notre Dame has more speed on the field against Notre Dame's offense will put more speed on the field than Clemson's offense will put speed on the field. But it's, not by a great deal, but that's not what they're doing right now. They're not the team that's got that great slot guy like Amari Rodgers a couple years ago, or Hunter Renfrow a couple years ago. A lot of the work they get out of the slot comes from the tight ends. They're not that guy they don't have a T. Higgins outside. They don't have a Justin Ross 6'4" burner on the outside. They've got big physical kids that they can win one-on-ones with. You can have them covered, and they're still going to throw the ball up and let those kids make those plays. So that's going to be a very big challenge for Notre Dame in this particular matchup. Let's look at the the Clemson defense. I'm going to stop. I'm going to try to stop saying that. I keep saying Syracuse, and I don't understand why. This is the strength of this Clemson football team, and it's gotten better in recent weeks, in my opinion, especially with the pass game. Their run game had a little bit of an off day against Clemson. Syracuse had some success with their running backs, and then Florida State had some success running the football against them, but they're a hard team to run on for the most part, as the numbers we showed earlier show. And a couple reasons for that. They're very talented on the offensive line, or defensive line. They're very deep on the defensive line, and they're going to run waves at you, but they're also big. They have good size. Both of their interior starters are over 300 pounds. Tyler Davis, or at 300 pounds or more. Tyler Davis is 6'2", 300. Brian Bresee is 6'5", 305. They'll also bring Rook Row, I think is how they said that is his name. If I read the pronunciation guide correctly from Clemson, he's a kid from Michigan. He'll play a lot too. He's 6'4", 295. Miles Murphy's one of their defensive ends. He's 6'5", 275. There are other three defensive ends that play a lot: KJ Henry, Xavier Thomas on the weak side, and then Justin Maskell, who will also play some as well on the weak side, but also more so play on the big side, on the strong side with Miles Murphy. They're all 255. Now, they're a little smaller at linebacker, but they're very athletic, and they fly downhill. They're not as creative and complex as they were under Brent Venables, but they'll do plenty of run stunts, plenty of stuff where they'll attack downhill and try to get after the opponent. So there's a lot you have to worry about with Clemson. And there's certainly a lot of speed on the second level that I think can help them in their matchups against Michael Mayer. There's a lot of talent. This team has a lot of talent in the front seven. The secondary has talent as well, but it's young in some spots. But they just, for some reason, they'll just turn guys loose. Now, they've limited that a little bit more recently, but Notre Dame's going to have to be able to find some ways to attack that. There's no question about it. So I want to get to some of their defensive looks. So just give me 1 second. Just got to send a note to Ryan. All right. So defensively, they are a mix between 4-2-5 and 4-3, and they've done a lot of 4-2-5 lately, and they'll mix between 4-2-5 and 4-3. I don't think that's the look that we're going to see. I want to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is a look against Clemson. Syracuse. Now, Syracuse is a team that likes to throw the football, or run the football. Excuse me. I am getting a lot of stuff wrong today. I know what I'm trying to say, but I'm saying it incorrectly. I do apologize. So you look at them and you say, hey, look, this is a team that likes to run the ball, but they like to run the ball out of a lot of spread stuff. And so give me one. I'm sorry, everybody. We're going to get on track here. We're just trying to get everything situated. So what they'll do is they'll play nickel a lot against these teams. So I'm playing a lot of nickel against Florida State, played a lot of nickel against against Wake Forest, obviously. And this is an example of their nickel look. So as you can see here, you've got two corners. You got a corner here. Let's get over here. And you got a corner here, got a corner here, and then nickel, safety, safety. And Malcolm Green is their nickel in a lot of instances. But what I think you're going to see is a lot more of what we saw against Boston College. Boston College did a lot more two tight end stuff. They go under center. Obviously, John McNulty's their offensive coordinator. He was at Notre Dame last year. And so you'll see this is a different type of look. Now, in this look, you see a more 4-3 personnel. So you obviously have your 4 down linemen. Your corners are still both up. And now you have Barrett Carter in the game. And with your 2 linebackers, obviously Trenton Simpson is their starting will linebacker. Their starting Mike is Jeremiah Trotter, who's from Jeremiah Trotter Jr., excuse me. So you'll have him there as well. This is more of what I think we will see personnel-wise against Notre Dame. I think that's the better matchup for Clemson. I just don't see them doing a lot against Notre Dame out of nickel on first. I mean, honestly, if I'm Clemson and Notre Dame's in 3rd and 5, I'm still not going to nickel, especially if Notre Dame does their 11 personnel like they did last week with Matt Salerno in the game. I would still have Barrett Carter. Barrett Carter's a better athlete than Matt Salerno. Sam Linebacker's a better athlete than the slot receiver that Tommy Rees likes to use on 3rd down. So I would still stay in that just to protect against the run, because Notre Dame will run it kind of anywhere. And then also it allows them to use him in certain looks. If they want to go cover 1, Barrett Carter matched up against Michael Mayer is going to be a lot better matchup for them than Malcolm Green matched up against Michael Mayer on 3rd down. So I certainly think those are different looks that we will see from Clemson. I think they'll mix up their looks, but I truly believe their base defense is going to be a 4-2-5. Now, they'll do a lot of different things with their corners. They'll play their corners up. They'll play their corners off. I think based on what we've seen from Notre Dame, if I'm Clemson, I'm coming up and playing my corners tight. I'm going to make you beat me down the field. That's the recipe for Notre Dame. If you're gonna defend Notre Dame, it's got to be we're gonna protect against the quick game. We're gonna protect against the screen game. We're gonna have our corners try to funnel the run game back inside. Although Notre Dame doesn't really run outside very often, which is mind-boggling to me. You're making it easier to defend, but this is what we're going to see. And so this is the thing that Notre Dame has to be prepared for, because this is a similar alignment to what Notre Dame used a lot of last week against Syracuse. The difference now is, Syracuse is going at Notre Dame last week with undersized players. I mean, as we talked about last week, they had one defensive lineman that was over 255 pounds that really played with any regularity. They had one defensive end who was listed at 215 pounds. They had guys who were 230 pounds. Their starting nose guard was 5'11", 265 pounds, which means he's closer in weight to Trenton Simpson than he is Clemson's interior defensive lineman. So I think you're going to have to be prepared to play against a much bigger team. And again, I'll give you the Clemson starting defense, or Syracuse's starting front 7 last week. 219, 266, 268, 225, 224, and 239. And you look at Clemson's starting front 7, their box is 255, 255, 305, 300, 240, 230, and 225. And they can run every bit as well as Syracuse's guys did last week, who were smaller guys. So I think that's a lot of what you're going to see from that look. That's a lot of what you're going to see from Clemson, I think, is they're just going to say, if you're going to line up in the same stuff, then we're going to line up in the same stuff. I think they're going to shoot their backers a lot. I think they're going to try to fire off and not let Notre Dame's offensive line get downhill. I think that's going to be what you're going to see from them. Their offensive defense has not been as dominant as I thought it was going to be this year, but they've been great against the run for the most part, and they're very quick off the ball. And that's what presents a little bit of a tough matchup when you look at Notre Dame. So I think that's an example of something we're going to see from Clemson in this weekend's game. So that's a bit of an intro look at Clemson. Obviously, we were having some technical problems with Ryan, so he had to jump out of the chat. So not as much interaction, but I did want to kind of give a nice overview of who Clemson is. I think from a talent standpoint, this is not the same Clemson team it's been. But make no mistake, this is still a very talented Clemson team. They have good receivers, not elite receivers. They're very good at running back. I think defensive line-wise, they're as talented as any team in the country defensive line-wise. I don't know if they always use it the right way. I think they haven't been as disruptive in the pass game as I expected them to be. But I do, however, believe that you're in a situation where run game wise, they're as good as we thought they would be. They're just not quite as good pass game wise. And so I think that's the matchup that I'm going to look for. And I mean, everyone's going to look for, right? It's going to be that Notre Dame offensive line and the defensive line against Clemson. That's going to be the matchup that determines whether or not Notre Dame has a chance to win this football game. So that's a look at who Clemson is. That's a look at what this matchup is. Tomorrow, we're going to have a mailbag coming up next. But tomorrow we'll dive more into the numbers. We'll look into specific matchups of the run game versus run defense, pass game versus pass defense on both sides. And we'll dive more into the individual matchups of these two teams when we get to that part of the show as well. So I just wanted to remind you of that before we get to the mailbag. So this is sort of an intro type podcast of Clemson. We'll dive into more specifics tomorrow. And then, of course, Thursday we'll get into keys to victory. And then Friday we'll do our predictions. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next, so don't go anywhere just yet. But before we head to the mailbag, I want to remind you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and, of course, share this podcast with not just physically share it. Go down there and hit the share button, share it with people but, share on social if you have a lot of Notre Dame fans. And then, of course, let people that that are Notre Dame fans, friends and family who are Notre Dame fans, let them know about our channel as well. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll have a lot of recruiting news, a lot of recruiting scoop this week for sure. So I want to dive into the mailbag, and we've got some stuff starred. You can go ahead and throw that in there. Ryan will be able to star those, and we can get to those here as we go through it. But just want to get to you all's comments and questions. We're going to begin with Irish Blood. It has a couple hot takes. He says, bold claim, the wide receivers will have more touchdowns this week than Michael Mayer will. Now, I guess I would be excited about that if you would tell me that that Michael Mayer is at least going to get one touchdown, because if he gets one and the receivers have more, then that's at least 3 passing touchdowns. I would say that's probably a good sign for Notre Dame, unless they happen to be, garbage touchdowns late. But if that happens, that would be I think in a game that I expect to be competitive, I think that'd be a very good sign for Notre Dame. His hot take number 2 is Logan Diggs has more rushing yards than Audric Estime. I mean, I wouldn't really call that a hot take. I mean, they're sort of 1A, 1B right now, right, as the primary runners. Logan had more yards 2 weeks ago, even before Audric went down. Audric's had more yards at other times. So, I mean, I think it's kind of a back and forth type deal. I don't think it's a situation where you're going to have one guy is the lead back. They're going to ride the hot guy. And if Logan Diggs is the hot guy, then you'll see it. I would actually kind of lean a little bit more towards Audric this week, just because of the physicality that Stanford brings, or Clemson brings, that you may want that bigger back. But then the counter argument is, look, they're going to be condensed the box. You want the guy that can bounce things a little bit more effectively, and Logan is certainly good at doing that. I did want to go down to this. I just saw this down here. And this is from We Are Not Marshall. He says, could use some prayers for my wife and I. Her father was flown to Albany Medical Center last night. He is battling pneumonia and kidney failure. We're headed there now. We're headed that way now. Thank you. You absolutely have it, buddy. There's no question about it. I'll ask everybody in this chat that believes in the power of prayer, as I do, to please keep We Are Not Marshall and his family, especially his father-in-law, in your prayers. Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. Keep us posted on how things go, for sure. Let's get to this next question from D. Troll Hunter. All right, mailbag didn't get to yesterday questions, the hard-hitting stuff. Christmas decorations okay before or only after Thanksgiving? Obviously, this is a personal preference thing. For me, I am not a fan of Christmas stuff being up until after Thanksgiving. I like a house that's got a lot of fall-looking stuff. It's got, I don't do Halloween. We don't do like the webs and the scary stuff, but what we do is we do fall stuff. So once the leaves start changing colors, we put our fall decorations up, which are kind of Thanksgiving-ish, and then we just kind of have that through Thanksgiving, and it's really not until, that weekend after Thanksgiving, after we've kind of gotten through all the leftovers, that we'll put the Christmas stuff up. So I know some people put Christmas stuff up in October. Some people do it, hey, November, Halloween's over, you do it now. I'm just not a Christmas decorations for me are not okay until after Thanksgiving. USMA 87, I feel like Clemson is gettable, which Notre Dame shows up, right? I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, that's the thing where we're at in this game is this is not, again, Clemson was gettable for Notre Dame 2 years ago. They just didn't play as well and didn't execute early in the game when they were moving the ball. I mean, Notre Dame's first 3 possessions went into Clemson territory. They had a missed field goal, a made field goal, and I believe a turnover on downs on another one. So, yeah, I mean, this is certainly a game that's gettable for Notre Dame. Clemson is a very good football team. They're not a vintage 2018, 2016, 2015 Clemson team. They remind me a lot more of the 2017 team. Just because they don't have that dynamic quarterback. And so I think that's where I kind of come down on it. They're certainly gettable. Notre Dame's gonna have to play well though, right? Like they're gonna have to play better than they did last week, in my opinion, especially in the pass game. So you have to limit the big plays a little bit, but then you're gonna have to make some plays in the pass game. If Notre Dame can do that, then yeah, they got a shot to win this game. There's no reason for me to think Notre Dame shouldn't win this game. I mean, if I'm being honest, if they play their game. This is not a game where, and we talked about this last night, this is not a game where Notre Dame has to play out of their minds to beat Clemson, where everything just goes perfect. They have to play well, just like Clemson has to play well to beat Notre Dame. If you don't bring your A game, you're going to lose, and that's true for both teams. This game is much more evenly matched than people think, and we'll dive a lot more into that tomorrow. Detroit Hunter also asks, do you believe our smaller defensive line players can give Clemson trouble like Syracuse did? I would hope that Notre Dame's defensive line plays better than Syracuse's defensive line. I think Notre Dame has a significantly better defensive line than Syracuse. I think that Clemson leaned on Syracuse. Look, Clemson's if it wasn't for all the turnovers, I don't think that game is quite as close as the score determined. I mean, Clemson had, I think, 3 turnovers in that game and still won by 7. It's not often you can turn the ball over 3 times in a game and beat a ranked opponent. And that's what they did because they just leaned on that small Syracuse offensive line. Now, what I would say is it's more like what the Notre Dame defensive line did last week against Syracuse, because we talked about Clemson's offensive line, right? I'm going to give you the size again. 6'2", 305, 6'5", 325, 6'4", 315, 6'5", 315, 6'6", 315 across the board. It's a big offensive line. Here's what Syracuse was last week. 6'5", 322, 6'6", 375, 6'4", 292, 6'6", 326, and 6'5", 335. So Syracuse had a much bigger offensive line than Clemson. I think Clemson's offensive line is a touch more athletic than Syracuse. Ryan, I'm not sure. Ryan's down there. I'm not sure if you agree with that, Ryan, that I think Clemson has a slightly more athletic across the board. Clemson doesn't have anybody or Syracuse doesn't have anybody as athletic. Ryan agrees. They don't have anybody as athletic as Matt Bergeron. But I think after that, the rest of their guys kind of spot for spot, they're more athletic than what the Syracuse guys are. But they're not quite as big. And they're not so athletic that all of a sudden they are going to give Notre Dame's guys problems. So I think it's similar to last week. I think the key for the Notre Dame defensive line is to be fast and physical, get up in their chest, win with leverage, beat them into gaps, and be disruptive. The thing about last week, like there were several runs last week where Sean Tucker ran the ball where he would make a cut and get 3-4 yards past the defensive line before the linebackers would tackle him. And then you'd look at it and it was like a 1-yard gain or a 0-yard gain because they were forcing him to make cuts so far behind the line that when the linebackers were cleaning up, it was minimal gains and sometimes even losses. One of the issues that Notre Dame has had, and I'm trying to remember what the specific numbers were. I put it in my key takeaways article, so I'm going to try to pull that up as I'm explaining this. But one of the issues that Notre Dame has had this year is they've been very good at pass rushing. And I found it. They ranked 6th coming into the Syracuse game. They ranked 16th nationally in sacks, but they only ranked 51st in tackles for loss. Now, the thing to understand about how that number is attributed. So tackles for loss include run stops behind the line of scrimmage, but also sacks. It's any play where you bring the team down. So you want to try to, and ideally, you want to try to be similar in tackles for loss and sacks. And that hasn't been the case for Notre Dame in the last couple of years. And we've talked about this before. We talked about how last year, when you looked at Oklahoma State was a team that was ranked very high in tackles for loss, and they were a team that was ranked very high in sacks. And this year it's you want to kind of be in a similar situation. So when you look at tackles for loss per game, for example, Clemson ranks 7th in tackles for loss this year, the Clemson's defense, but they rank 29th in sacks. That tells me that they're making a lot more run game stops behind the line. Notre Dame is the opposite. They were 16th in sacks and 51st in run stops. Well, against Syracuse, one of the positives from that game is Notre Dame doubled up their sack totals with stops behind the line. So, I mean, their tackle for loss numbers. They had 4 sacks, but they had 8 tackles for loss, which tells me they got more stops behind the line than they've gotten in recent games, which is where you want to be. Whereas last year, that's not where Notre Dame was. And so, and they weren't coming into this game because we saw a similar situation last year. So last year, Notre Dame ranked 12th in the country in sacks per game. Oklahoma State ranked first. And then, but Notre Dame ranked, let's see here, let's pull this up. They ranked 51st last year as well in tackles for loss, whereas Oklahoma State ranked first in tackles for loss as well. So Oklahoma State had 56 sacks, but they had 117 tackles for loss, which means they more than doubled up their sack total. Notre Dame, however, when you look at last year, had 41 sacks last year, but only had 81 tackles for loss, right? So it just wasn't quite the same ratio that you kind of want to look for. So I think that's kind of where you want to be. You need to be more disruptive in the run game, and Notre Dame has not been disruptive enough in the run game. They were last week. They've got to be that way against Clemson. That's got to continue. Quickness, penetration, pushing those blockers back, and the way you push back a guy that's bigger than you, get up under his pads, get him on his heels. And that's how you can have success. And we saw Gabriel Rubio doing that. We saw Chris Smith doing that. We saw Jason Adamiola doing that. We saw Howard Krause using his speed to beat guys off the line. It's going to be similar this week. Detroit Hunter says another question. What non-defensive lineman from Clemson concerns you the most on defense? It's the linebackers, primarily Trenton Simpson. I mean, that's a talented group of defensive backs. They really are. I really like their linebacking core. We talked about them coming into the season. We love Trenton Simpson. He's an excellent player, very athletic, very explosive kid. He comes into the game as their leading tackler with 46 tackles. He hasn't been as disruptive this year as I expected him to be from a tackles for loss standpoint. I thought he'd be a guy that, could be more of a 10 tackle for loss guy this season. Coming into this game, he hasn't been that guy. He's only got a half a tackle for loss this year. That surprises me a little bit. But here's the thing. He's athletic. He's going to be flying around, and you can't let him go off. You look at the other linebackers. Jeremiah Trotter's got 4.5 tackles for loss. Barrett Carter's got 4. Barrett Carter's a kid that I think that in their base defense, you're going to see him trigger a lot as, coming off the edge. He'll do a lot of those type of things. That's something Notre Dame's going to have a plan for. He's got 4 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. So I'm not as concerned about Jeremiah Trotter. That's just do your job and effectively get to him. He's a good football player, but he's not a guy that should present bad matchups. It's Trenton Simpson, number 1, and then Barrett Carter, number 2. Those are the 2 guys that I'm most concerned about other than the defensive linemen. Let's get to the next question from USMA. How much of the run game challenges are due to O-line spacing? Notre Dame O-line looks really tightly spaced. Run game has been better late, but could spacing help? I guess I'm going to have to disagree with the premise of your question. I don't think that the offensive line has had challenges for a while. I mean, we're talking about a team that you say better of late. This is a team that's been rushed for at least 223 yards in 4 of their last 5 games. They've already gone over 200 yards more this year than they did last year. So I wouldn't say that I think they have run game challenges. The spacing is due to the scheme that they employ. They run a lot of duo. They'll run some inside zone, and that requires a little bit tighter splits. That's just kind of the nature of it. I don't think spacing helps a ton on that because then you create more run lanes for guys to run through. But that's also why Notre Dame does so much with their tight ends on the edge to try to, if you're going to have tighter splits, having that tight end on the edge sort of widens the edge of the line of scrimmage. It creates an additional gap that defenses have to plan for, and that helps protect a little bit of that. Now, I mean, you could say, hey, look, the spacing could be a little bit wider. I think it should be wider, but that's also because I think they should be running more inside zone. I think inside zone provides you to have a little bit more width between. You don't have a ton of spacing on inside zone because you're working on combo blocks. And that's really kind of what it comes down to is you're working double teams. And the further you are, the harder it is for you to handle double teams. And so that's a big part of what Notre Dame does. They're a combo block team like crazy. And so the tighter the splits, the easier it is to kind of have those type of blocks and make those type of blocks. Stephen Robert asks, how does the O-line stack up against the middle of Clemson's defense? We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, Robert. But that's going to be the battle, right? I think the tackles can I won't say win the battle, but at least hold their own against the really talented Syracuse ends. It's going to be, can the inside guys handle it? And obviously Jarrett Patterson, you expect it to play well, but can Zeke Correll play well against Tyler Davis? And when he's matched up against Brian Berseek, can he handle that? Can Josh Lugg have a game against these teams? Look, Zeke and Josh to me played really well last week against Syracuse. And as I really liked how they played. I thought it was the best game that Josh Lugg's played all year. It was one of Zeke Correll's better games of the season, and Zeke's played really well the last month of the season. So if they continue playing like they can, then they can hold their own. And I think that's going to be a big key. I don't see Notre Dame just dominating Clemson's defensive line. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to do to Clemson what they did to UNLV and to Syracuse. Those are different animals, just completely different undersized teams that you couldn't really push around. So ultimately, this game's going to come down to Notre Dame's going to have to make some plays in the perimeter. They're not going to be able to come into this game and just line up and bully Clemson the way that they did other teams. They're going to have some scheme stuff to keep Clemson honest. They're going to have to throw the football down the field. Yes, Notre Dame's got a really good offensive line that's playing at a very high level, but Clemson also has a really good defensive line, and you're just not going to bully them. You're just not. You're going to have to execute at a high level, but you're going to have to make plays to keep them honest. And if Notre Dame tries to just regurgitate the game plan from BYU and the game plan from UNLV and the game plan especially from Syracuse, where you're just kind of lining up, in Stanford same way, just kind of lining up 12 personnel, 13 personnel, and just thinking you're going to bully Clemson, I just don't think it's going to happen. And so they're going to have a little bit more creativity and diversity from how they attack Clemson in this game. 99 problems, BK ain't one. Do we think that Ole Miss can beat Alabama? Can they beat Alabama? Of course. Will they beat Alabama? Only if their defense plays a lot better. This is not a typical Ole Miss team. They're not as explosive in the pass game as they've been. They're a team that's really good at running the football. They got a very young quarterback, and they're protecting him to a degree. They went from having a guy that was a multi-year starter last year in Matt Corral, who I didn't even think played necessarily great last year, to now Jackson Dart. Jackson's been a solid player, but he turns the ball over a little too much. He is a big play guy down the field, but they don't use him as much. They've been a team that really dominates with the ground game. They're averaging 267.2 yards per game. Freshman Quinshon Judkins, who Notre Dame offered last year, is already over 1,000 yards with 13 touchdowns. Zach Evans is at 680 yards with 7 touchdowns. And then Jackson Dart has 473 yards. So they're a team that likes to run the ball. They can be a big play team on the perimeter. I thought they did a nice job of battling back against A&M this past weekend. A&M jumped on them 14-7, and then Ole Miss outplayed them the rest of the game. But the problem is their defense is just not good. The reason their defense looked better last week is because, just their offense, the A&M offense is just awful at this point in time. So I don't think that was necessarily an improvement. And this is the reason why that I predicted LSU to beat Ole Miss, because I had no faith that Ole Miss's defense was going to be able to stop a decent offense, and that's exactly what happened. They gave up 45 points to LSU, 34 to Auburn, 28 to Vanderbilt, and they got ripped up by A.J. Swan. They gave up 27 to Tulsa, gave up 262 rushing yards to Tulsa, 301 to Auburn, 252 to LSU. They kept A&M in check because A&M started a freshman quarterback and just isn't a very good offense. Bama will be a much better offense. They will be a much better test for Ole Miss, so they will have to play a lot better. But, of course, they get a bye week to prepare for that, because Alabama plays LSU this weekend while Ole Miss is going to be home resting up and trying to put together a game plan. Milton Fan 15, what is the best way to utilize Drew Pine? What are the things he should be asked to do if utilized correctly? What is he capable of? Well, look, if he's used correctly, I think he's capable of being the guy that we saw against North Carolina and BYU. A guy that can really hurt you in the short to intermediate game, that occasionally, if given a one-on-one outside, can hurt you. I think, number one thing Drew's going to have to get better at is Drew's got to learn to put a little bit more touch on his downfield throws. He did a great job of that on the second pass to Tobias Merriweather for a touchdown. He did a great job of that on the touchdown to the big play to Jaden Thomas against UNLV. But far too often, he puts that ball up. It'll get trajectory, but it gets up there with weight. Too much speed because he's trying to muscle it up, gets up there way too fast, it gets down too fast. They've missed probably 3 or 4 potential shots at big plays just because he's getting the ball up too quick. Even the seam to Matt Salerno, if he just kind of gets that ball out there a little bit, lets Salerno run underneath it, he might have had a shot at it. If he throws the ball earlier to Tobias and just puts it out over top and lets Tobias go get it, that's a touchdown. So that's something he's going to have to do better. And you're going to have to take some shots. I mean, that's the reality. You're going to have to take some shots against Clemson. You're going to have to attack down the field, let him take one-on-ones. And it's not a read. It's Drew. When we get cover one with press corners and you've got Dion or Tobias or Lindsey or, somebody like that on the field, we've got to take that shot, especially with the big guys. We've got to take that shot. That's certainly one step. Step 2 is you've got to do more with the RPO game. Now, one thing that's going to help that is you're going to have to widen the splits out a little bit. You're going to have to do some things where it's not always perimeter RPOs, but, some stuff that kind of like we saw, like we broke down from Clemson. The play action game is also going to have to be better. I want to see them move the pocket. As we've seen, Drew throws pretty well on the run. He had a really nice ball running to his, moving to his left against Syracuse where they jump the tight end. So he kind of throws flips his hips, gets the ball back to Deion Colsey on a really nice throw for a big play. So I thought he did a really nice job there. I think doing things where he's not always sitting right in the pocket. It is much easier for a defense to go after a quarterback when you know where he's always going to be. And they'll do the occasional bootleg, but I really think they need to move the pocket more. I think what those things do also, it limits your read. You've got a 1-2 run read. I think there needs to be more play action stuff where Drew doesn't have to think about where he's going with the ball. You know where you're going with the football. When you're in your 12 and 13 personnel, you can absolutely manipulate Clemson into getting into single high coverage, which means you can absolutely manipulate yourself into some one-on-ones down the field. Don't let Drew read it. Just say, dude, when we get in this look, I'm going to make this call. And when I make that call, you're throwing it here. Have Michael Mayer come right off the ball and run right at that middle safety. Just Mayer run right at that dude. That's going to keep that safety on Mayer. And then you just, Drew, hit the top of your drop and then just let it go. Just throw it as far as you can throw it. Let those kids run underneath it. And I think those are things you need to do. But, and the final thing for me, if the running backs are not a bigger part of the pass game this week, I'm going to lose it. I'm just going to absolutely lose it because that is when Drew was comfortable, when you had different things out of your 21 personnel. 21 personnel needs to be an absolute big part of what they do this weekend. And using Chris Tyree more in the screen game. We have a question down here from Jay Henry that kind of goes along with this question from Milton fan. How would you use Chris Tyree in this game? Clemson's has athleticism to stay with him. Yeah, sure, but they're going to have to focus on him if you use him correctly. You haven't had to worry about using athleticism to stop him because he's been right up the middle. You saw the one time they got him on the perimeter last week was on a swing route. He catches it and runs for 10 yards on the second and long and gets him into a third and short situation. So do more stuff like that. Run him on perimeter stuff with the swings, with wheels, different things like that, where then with Clemson running with him, send him on a swing. Barrett Carter maybe goes flying out with him, and then you just throw a little dip screen right behind it, little slip screen right behind it to your running back. Do things where you then use him, to get outside. The Clemson linebackers move to him, and then you do some inside run stuff, or have him motion across. Let's say you go 22 personnel, put him out to the 2 tight end side, have him go motion across real fast, and then you can run sweep away. Or if they overplay the 2 tight end side, then you can run him on, go in motion, throw him a bubble screen, throw him a jet sweep. There's a lot of stuff they can do if they just want to be creative with it. The reality is Tommy Rees has not made Chris Tyree a priority, Jay, and that's the problem. And this is a game where he has to be a priority because it's not that even he is going to make a ton of plays, but if he can make some plays, and this is a kid that ran for 20-yard touchdown the only time he's ever touched the ball against Clemson. He ran for a 20-plus yard touchdown against their first-team defense. But if you can get him free for a couple plays, like we saw against Oklahoma State, like we saw against Cal, like we saw against North Carolina, and they have to worry about him, it's not even about him taking the game over. It's about him creating more running room and more room to work for the other players on offense. That's the key. And if you don't make that a priority, then you lose that weapon. And to me, that's the mistake that Notre Dame has made so far. But they've, last week was good. They got Tobias and Dion in the game together. It's something I've been asking them to do, calling for. So maybe they'll finally build this part back into it as well. D-Rock Irish says, in my opinion, Shipley's the X factor. He beat you with his hard running and catching pass out of the backfield. He camouflages Clemson's offensive flaws. Travis Etienne did that too. We need to put a spy on Shipley. I'm not putting a spy on Shipley. I'm not, because then they're smart coaches. They're going to see that, and then they're going to utilize it. All you have to do is be disciplined. Look, no matter what you call, somebody is going to have to account for the running back as part of your base calls. You don't need to spy someone, because if I'm an offensive coordinator and I know you're spying him with this guy, then I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to move him. I'm going to send him on routes where I'm trying to free somebody else up. Make your calls and execute your calls. There's not a single call that Notre Dame is going to run this week where the running back is not accounted for by somebody. You just have to be prepared for it. And Will Shipley's a heck of a player. Is he any better than Sean Tucker? Ryan, do you think Will Shipley right now is a better player than Ryan Tucker? I don't. And they kept him in check. Why? Because they dominated the point of attack, and they were disciplined with how they defended him in the pass game. Wherever the coverage was, if he comes into your zone, you got to see it and you got to attack it. I mean, Notre Dame twice last week ran with Isaiah Foskey. Ryan looks at me, and because Ryan and I were at the game, he's like, dude, Isaiah Foskey just ran with Sean Tucker on a wheel route. And then Syracuse saw that, and they said, hey, they're trying to put Foskey on Sean Tucker, and they went right back to it the next play, and Foskey ran with him again and was hip to hip with him again. Nick, you've got some athletic cats, right? And so I think that it's a thing where just be disciplined, right? When this defense is disciplined, they shut down Ohio State, they shut down North Carolina, they shut down every team they've played. They shut down Syracuse. They've literally shut down every team they've played. Look, they've already played two offenses that are significantly better than Clemson. They held them to 21 points, and then the other team had 14 points. Well, I'd say I'll give them 20 points. I think that Clemson had 20 points, or North Carolina had 20 points, because they scored a touchdown when it was 38-14. It was kind of still somewhat in doubt at that point in time, but they shut down North Carolina for most of that game. They shut down Ohio State for most of that game. This is not a better offense than either of those teams. But when they've gotten in trouble, like we saw against Syracuse, like we saw against Stanford, like we saw against Marshall, like we saw late against Ohio State, early against Ohio State when they gave up a couple early big plays, is when you don't execute your call, that's when Notre Dame gets hurt. When Notre Dame executes 11 on 11, nobody's moved the ball on this year. Nobody. Not Ohio State, not North Carolina, nobody. It's about doing your job. And I thought Coach Freeman said that perfectly yesterday. It's about the goal for this team is everybody do your job every single play, and that's all you got to do. They don't need Isaiah Foskey to be Hercules on Saturday. They don't need Cam Hart to look like a first-round corner. Just do your job. Play your game and do your job. Clemson's going to make some plays. They will. But they're not going to make enough to beat you if everybody does your job on both sides of the ball, in my opinion. If you don't, and you give up the mistakes and then you make the mental mistakes, D-Rock, then that's when Will Shipley hurts you. When your linebacker gets caught peeking in the backfield and then Will Shipley runs around him, it's not because you didn't have a spy on him. It's because the guy that was supposed to cover him did not do his job. If they do that, they'll be okay. They'll be able to keep Clemson down. This isn't a great Clemson offense. It's a good Clemson offense. That's going to be the key. But ultimately, you just got to pressure the quarterback. Don't let DJ get comfortable. And for all the panic about, I've had people say Notre Dame can't beat this team with the quarterback that they have. I want to be like, well, I get what you're saying, but have you seen Clemson's quarterback play this year? This is not a team that's had great quarterback play. I mean, say what you want about Drew Pine, and he has not played well the last couple games. Drew Pine's got a passer rating of 143.7. He's averaging 7.2 yards per play, and he's completing 61.8% of his passes. DJ is only averaging 7.7 yards per attempt. He's got a passer rating of 148.7, and he's completing 63.8% of his passes. Cade Klubnik, when he's come in, he's completing sub 50% of his passes. He's only 9 of 19 on the season, 47.4%, 85 yards, 4.5 per attempt, and he's got a touchdown he threw against Georgia Tech. So their quarterback play hasn't lit the world on fire either. And so to me, it's which team's quarterback can make the most plays is ultimately what this game is going to come down to. The element that Clemson has and Notre Dame does not, however, is DJ can make plays with his legs a little bit more frequently, although we've seen Drew Pine be able to do some of that a little bit as well. I think that's been an underrated aspect of what he's done this year so far. Irish Blooded with another question. If they are going to run a lot of RPO, can we send a copy of the tape to Tommy for him to see what RPO looks like for later games? Believe me, Irish Blooded, I love the comment, by the way, but Tommy Reese sees teams run RPOs every week, because when you prepare for the other team's defense, you're watching what the offense does, and almost everyone in college football runs RPOs. So, yes, I hope that he sees them. I hope he sees them. Milton Fan 15, anyone know any why Deion Colsey just started getting real reps? I believe that was I'm not going to guess on that one. I just know that they had been working on, it's very similar to the Tobias situation. He was injured, I'd say injured. He was limited in fall camp because of injuries. He did miss a couple weeks in fall camp. They had worked him back. He was healthy. He was getting reps, and they would use reps during the week, and he would get reps and with the first team offense, and they'd have packages for him like they had for Tobias. And then they get to Saturday and just wouldn't use them. So he was finally just using what you had, using what you're practicing. You spend the time on these packages, then use them. And I think that's really what it boiled down to. And I was glad to see him finally play. He played a little bit against UNLV, but it was good to see him play because he's a weapon. He's a good football player. And you start using him more, than it takes the pressure off of Lorenzo Styles and Tobias Merriweather and those other players. And it makes them a better football team. Jay Henry asks, will Miles Murphy line up against Fisher or Alt, or do they move him around? He'll play both sides, is what I've noticed. I believe they go strong and weak. I actually have to dive into that a little bit more here, but I believe that they play him strong and weak. So I'll have to ask that one. They may play right or left. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. The cut-ups that I have is he's always playing right. So actually, Ryan just stepped out. I'll ask him. Hey, Ryan, quick question for you. Did Clemson go right and left with their ends, or do they go strong and weak? They go right left. So I think, yeah. So Ryan said they go right left. Now that I think about it, yes. So Murphy will be lined up against Joe Alt most of the game, based on that look. So that's going to make for a really interesting matchup. That's for sure. Very interesting matchup. Very good question, Jay. Now that puts Blake Fisher on the smaller, quicker guys, which is going to also make for an interesting matchup. We are happily independent. Why don't we do the 3-1 lineup? Put Mayer at the bottom, then Braden and Jaden, and one on top to be Tobias. They actually do that. They do that. They lined up that way against UNLV. They lined up that way against Syracuse. They're just not throwing Mayer the ball in the backside. I don't know why. If I get Mayer backside, there's been several times this year in the red zone also where I've said, just throw a fade to Mayer. I mean, it's a one-on-one. Just give him a chance to go make a play, and they just refuse to do it. I don't understand why. It's a little puzzling. There's no question. Beefeater with a question. How come Jaden Thomas is not listed on the depth chart as a tight end? Greg McElroy seems to think he was a tight end. That's because Greg McElroy apparently doesn't do his homework. And as I would say again, even if you count Jaden Thomas as a tight end, he still got that personnel call wrong because you had two running backs in the game. You can't have 14 personnel if you have two running backs in a game. But it's an Alabama grad for you. Beefeater also asks, is a hot dog a sandwich? If not, what is it? Also, do you consider Die Hard a Christmas movie? Yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. It has meat and it has a bun. So it is a sandwich for me. There are types of sandwiches you can have that don't have meat in it, obviously. But if you have meat and you have a bun, I believe that's a sandwich. So, yes, I do believe that's a sandwich. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Yeah. I mean, he's got ho, ho, ho on the tape that he uses at the end to pull it out. The whole thing is built around a Christmas party. Yes, it's at Christmas. Yes, it is a Christmas party. Ryan is shaking his head, or a Christmas movie. Ryan is shaking his head. No, it is definitely a Christmas movie. Of course it's a Christmas movie. It's an action Christmas movie. It's not your typical Christmas movie, but it is. Jay Montalbano, Brian, what is your biggest fear about the Clemson game? It's here's my biggest fear. That Notre Dame looks at the Syracuse game and says, we're going to do that same thing again against Clemson. We're going to go 12 and 13 personnel, and we're just going to run it right up the A-gaps the whole game and win. If they do that, that's my biggest fear. I don't think they can win the game that way, unless the defense just makes some crazy plays. Jim Halloran says, can Notre Dame score with Clemson? Yeah, they can. Look, I'm going to keep telling y'all, this is not a great Clemson team. It's not. This is not a great Clemson. This is not a great Clemson offense. It really isn't. You look at them this year, and they're a 20 to 30 something point team. In my opinion, they're not a team that consistently, in my opinion, puts up a lot of points. I just don't fear them the way that I have in the past. Could they score over 30 in this game? Yeah, if Notre Dame's offense doesn't play well and the defense gives up a lot of big plays, but I just don't see it. TJ Fallon, you got some jokes now. Who are we playing? Thank you for the superset, TJ. I've heard 3 different teams. They're playing Clemson. I got a lot of teams on my mind. I got film over here. I got film over there. I'm dealing with connection problems with my co-host. I got all this stuff going on. I'm sorry that I misspoke. I apologize. But clearly they're playing the number 5 Clemson team. 99 Props BK1. Brian, what do you think about the comments made by Syracuse coach that Notre Dame is basically playing an academy-type offense? That's not what he was saying. That's not what he was saying. You guys are taking that, and what he's saying is, what do those teams do? They run the football, and they control the clock, and they control the line of scrimmage. That's what he was saying. And that's what they do. I mean, okay, they still couldn't stop it. I don't think that was an insult. Sometimes I think people look for comments, and they put their own feelings onto a comment. It's kind of like people that listened to Marcus Freeman talk about Brian Mason yesterday and said, "Oh, that's a shot at Tommy Rees." No, it wasn't. It was a praise of Brian Mason. And same thing here. He's saying they're like those teams. What do those teams do? They control the line of scrimmage. They run the football. The pass game is just a slight complement to that. It's not an academy type of offense. It's not even close to academy type of offense because they're not running the veer. They're not running triple option. They're not doing any of that stuff. They're a power running team that is just not throwing the ball effectively right now. Now, a month ago, they were more balanced. I mean, we kind of joked about how in Drew Pine's first road start, they literally had 289 rushing yards and 289 passing yards until they took a knee at the end of the game, which took 2 yards away and left them at 287. They were over 200 in both against BYU. They're going through a rough patch. It's up to Tommy Rees to figure out how to get Drew going. But he wasn't saying they run an academy type of offense. He was comparing them to what those teams do, which are heavy ball control, power running teams, and that's what Notre Dame was doing against them. So I don't think it was an insult, and I don't think he was saying it the way that you're taking it, in my opinion. Okay, let's go here. Archer says, if Ohio State doesn't hang up 60-plus this weekend, is it a failure? Iowa put 30 points and 400 yards on Northwestern last week. Look, let me tell you something. That is one of the worst teams in college football right now, Northwestern. They're really bad. But, 60-plus, that's a lot of points. There's 2 things I look at. I think, number one, Northwestern is they kind of quit. They gave up 42. I don't say they quit, but there's no confidence on the side of the ball. They gave up 42 points to Wisconsin. They gave up 31 to Maryland and 33 to Iowa. Can Ohio State score 60? Sure. But I don't know if Ohio State's really good on offense, but they're not the insane juggernaut that they've been in the past. I mean, you take the Toledo game out. I mean, they're consistently 40-50, 40-50, 40-50 against everybody at Notre Dame. I think that's probably more consistent. I don't think Ryan Day has any interest in necessarily running up the score on Northwestern, although I would because I don't like Pat Fitzgerald. But, I don't know. I don't know if he'll want to do that. I mean, are they capable of it? Sure. But he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that's this year with this offense. I think if they get that kind of lead, they'll just kind of run it at Northwestern. So is it a failure? No. If you score over 40 points and win by over 30, that's not a failure. It's a good win. If I'm Ohio State with what I got coming up too, I'm sorry. I got Maryland on the road. That's not going to be a cakewalk game. Maryland's a quality football team this year. They're 6-2. Right now, they gave Michigan a game, in my opinion, and battled in their other loss as well. So that's no cakewalk game on the road, and then that's right before Michigan. You're coming off of a hard-fought game against Penn State. Now, Iowa wasn't a hard-fought game from the standpoint it was never close, but Iowa is a physical defense, If I'm Ohio State and I'm up 35-7 in the third quarter, I'm pulling my starters and letting my young kids get some work. And, you'll still score on them, but I think that probably stop you from getting to 60. At least that's what I would do. And let your guys rest for this last 3-game stretch because Northwestern stinks. I think they're going to go 111. I really do. And here's the thing. If Scott Frost wasn't an idiot and didn't kick that onside kick at the beginning of that game, they might go 0-12 because Northwestern had just gone up 20 – or Nebraska had just gone up 28-17 on Northwestern. And then he does that dumb onside kick. Nebraska or Northwestern recovers it and goes downfield and scores, and then the game just completely changed there. But honestly, I think that they would probably go 0-12, and they're bad. They're really bad. And I enjoy it because I'm not a big – I don't care much for Pat Fitzgerald. TJ Fallon with another super chat. Who is a first-round draft pick, Alt or Fisher? TJ, I don't think it's an either-or. I think it's a both and. I think if they both play to their potential, they're both first-round draft picks. I think – it's funny is I would have said coming into the season that there was a better chance that Blake Fisher leaves early than Joe Alt. But after the way that they've played this year, I would say there's a better chance that Joe Alt leaves earlier than Blake Fisher. Of course, that could always change. But I think both of those kids have first-round talent. I do. And I know that Ryan agrees because we've had this conversation before. Now, it's not easy getting in the first round. You've got to play to your potential, but both of those kids have it. Plus, they'll be coached by Harry Hiestand, which always gives you a little bit of a bump when you look at how most NFL teams evaluate Harry Hiestand coached offensive linemen. Joel Easton says, Mailbag, if you are a Coach Washington or Coach Golden, do the interior D-line guys do a lot of slants across the face of the O-line, or do you trust them to go right after the O-line? I think you've got to use movement to a degree. I'm not a big fan of doing a lot of twists against Clemson because they're a zone team and they do some counter stuff. And if they catch you, and this happened to NC State, they caught NC State in a twist and they just washed it all inside and quarterback went out the gate. So I'm not a big twist guy. I'm more of a slant slam guy, so slanting your line hard, letting them shoot gaps, letting them get a vertical slant. See, that's the thing for me is do you just slant because you're trying to go for width and free up linebackers, or are you trying to slant and try to get a vertical push and then slam it with a linebacker? That's what I like against this Clemson team, is more of that. Now, the danger is if you're doing a lot of that where you're slamming your linebacker, then your safeties have to run fit off of that. And that's where that play I drew up earlier can be dangerous because then they pull that thing and throw it behind you. So you're going to have to be very disciplined on that. As well. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I would slant some, but I think penetration is the key. Getting in their pads. What I'm not doing is just coming off and just doing what they did early in the year, which is kind of come off, run right in the middle of a guy, just kind of gap contain. I don't want to see that. I want to see penetration. I want to see getting upfield and forcing the running back to make early cuts. The further behind the line, I've said this before, you all know this, the further behind the line that you can make a running back make his cut, the less likely he's going to be able to have a big play. That's just the reality. There'll be some exceptions like Sean Tucker making that early cut and then just taking that outside zone all the way at the backside. That's not going to happen a lot. That's a rare thing. That's just a great read by that running back, and you just got to do a little bit better job of containing it. But they didn't that didn't work the rest of the game. What Notre Dame did against Syracuse is they just outran them into the backfield, and there was nothing Syracuse could do about it. Robert Bischoff says, if we pull off the upset, do we finally get back in the top 25? Robert, we talked about this a little bit last night. I won't be completely stunned if Notre Dame is in the top 25 tonight of the college football playoff rankings. I broke that down last night. But if they beat Clemson, there's no question they're going to be back in the top 25. They'll most likely have 3 wins over top 25 teams by that point in time, assuming Syracuse wins this weekend at Pitt, which is not a given. But yeah, I'd be shocked if they're not in the top 25 with a win over a number 5 Clemson. And you'd be 6-3. There's no question. There's no question. There's no way they're not in the top 25. And the thing is, they were right outside the top 25 in the AP and the coaches polls. I think they were like 30th in the coaches or AP, and then like only a spot or 2 lower in the coaches poll. You beat Clemson, you definitely jump into the top 25. Plus, there's like several games where there's ranked teams playing each other. So if LSU loses to Bama, that's their 3rd loss. And then NC State and Wake Forest both play. Whoever loses that game will have a 3rd loss, and they're already in the 20s. They would fall behind Notre Dame most likely if they beat Clemson. because then that would give Notre Dame 3 wins over the 3 best teams in the ACC. So they would certainly deserve to be ranked in the top 25 at that point. John Leahy says, does Clemson have a guy who can cover Mayer one-on-one? Sometimes. I mean, they're not going to consistently win that battle. No, I don't know if anybody has that. It just one-on-one for an entire game, you're going to have some plays where you stop them, but more often than not, no. No, I don't think so. All right, here we go. Rob Didoff. Brian, on Saturday, we needed 2 turnovers and a blocked punt to help generate 21 points. If the QB play does not improve against Clemson, we need 20 points. We need 21 points in this fashion again to win? Probably. I mean, that's kind of how you beat Clemson. That's what they did. Here's a thing that we don't talk enough about from the 2020 game. I had somebody say yesterday, Ian Book is the reason Notre Dame beat Clemson. And I'm like, no, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is the reason that they beat Clemson. I mean, let's not forget, it was 13-10. Clemson was coming back, and Owusu-Koramoah comes off the edge, literally takes the ball away from Travis Etienne and runs it back for a touchdown. Make it 20-10. On the very next possession, he gets beat on the slant route by Amari Rogers. He strips Amari Rogers from behind. Clarence Lewis, I believe, is the guy that recovers it. And Notre Dame's offense lost yards on the following drive and still kicked the field goal. So a 13-10 game turns into a 23-10 game because of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. If he doesn't do that, Notre Dame does not win that game. Simple as that. I mean, let's not forget that the Notre Dame offense had a turnover late in the game. They had, I think, 2 huge red zone mistakes. You had to remember Michael Mayer had that big drop in the red zone against Clemson. Ian Book had a fumble in the red zone against Clemson. Yeah, I mean, but your defense stepped up and made plays. Yes, that's what you need to do. Clemson did that against Notre Dame in 2015. You know, the win that they had they forced a bad punt by Tyler Newsome that gave them a short field. They had recovered a fumble by Notre Dame to set up another score in a game they won by 2. And so that's, yes, to beat a good team, you need help from the other side of the ball, in my opinion, more often than not. So, yeah, but look, the quarterback's got to play better, right? Because Syracuse is not Clemson. They're a good football team, but they're not Clemson. Mike Reddy said, you've mentioned that in 2015, the Clemson Notre Dame game sent each team in opposite directions. Could we see the same thing this week with a Notre Dame win? I would say no, because I think, number one, I think Dabo's a better coach than Brian Kelly. Number 2, I think that program is on much stronger ground than the Notre Dame team was in 2015. So I don't think so, but I think what it would signify, Mike, which is also kind of to your point, I think it would be kind of an indication that Clemson is officially not the program that they were. Will they collapse the way Notre Dame did in 2016? No, I don't see that. Number 1, that Notre Dame team in 2015, as talented as they were, the only ranked team they beat all year was Navy. Clemson already has 3 wins over ranked teams. So it's a different situation, and it's better coaching. It's a better infrastructure. But I think it would signify that the era of Clemson being a national powerhouse, and Ryan, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this as well. I do think Notre Dame beating Clemson would most likely signify that the era of Clemson being an official power or a major power like they were, a national title contender, is over. I do, because I already think they're kind of there. You know, with last year, they've been good this year, but not great. The ACC's gaining on them. I think if Notre Dame beats them, and it'd be the second time in 3 games that Notre Dame would have beat them, then I think that signifies. I mean, honestly, it would say that Notre Dame is the preeminent power in the ACC. I mean, let's not forget that the only team in the ACC that's really beat Notre Dame in the last however many years is Clemson. That's it. I mean, they haven't lost to Florida State, right? I mean, I'm trying to think. I can't remember the last time Notre Dame lost to an ACC team that's not named Clemson. You know, they didn't lose to any ACC teams last year. They didn't lose to any ACC. The only ACC team they lost to in 2020 was Clemson. In 2019, they didn't lose to an ACC team. They lost to Michigan and Georgia. In 2018, the only game they lost, period, was to Clemson. 2017, Miami back in 2017. That's the last time Notre Dame lost to an ACC team. Now, keep in mind, Notre Dame plays at least 5 ACC games a year. So, yeah, it would kind of mean that Notre Dame is the best team in the ACC without actually being in the ACC. But I do think it would signify that. I could be wrong. And I think a win over Notre Dame, also a win over Notre Dame for Clemson, would sort of be that moment of, hey, we may not be what we were with Trevor Lawrence, but we're back to being a team that you got to worry about, in the postseason. I do think it would mean that. Derek Hart with a question. Derek asked, do you think the scan offense keeps the O-line down too long and creates false starts? No, I don't think that's what creates the false starts. I think the false starts come because you are running the clock way down, and they see the clock and they know it's getting to that point in time. And then the issue on Saturday was just, I think, was just more of a just crowd noise and just not being locked in. I think is really what that was more about. And I think they only had one false start, I believe, from an offensive lineman on Saturday. All right, get some more of these questions. Dan Muller, do you think Notre Dame will take more one-on-one shots deep to try and keep the 8 out of the box? Cough, lots of Tobias, Mayer, Deion Colsey, Braden Lindsey on some different concepts. Like I would do some play action shots where I would almost run like a, I would take Mayer and just kind of run him like right down the field on like a 45-degree angle right past the safety, and then kind of motion Braden Lindsey down and then just have him run a climb underneath it. Things like that where, off play action or different concepts. I think there's got to be some different shots. So one-on-ones, to your point, yeah, I think they need to. Do I think they will? I've given up trying to figure out what this Notre Dame offense is going to do schematically. I mean, it makes no sense. So when I tell you guys what needs to happen, it's not a prediction of what will happen. It's of what needs to happen. I have no clue what Tommy Rees is going to do at this point in time. None. John Leahy asked, Brian Mason has done a great job at Notre Dame. What would be the next step in his career, moving a position coach, or could he go straight to OC? I mean, he's coached defense in the past as well. He is, moving to a position coach would be to me, it would be a downgrade for him. I mean, he's the coordinator of the special teams. I think if his next career path is being a head coach somewhere, I would imagine. So I don't think that it. No, I think the next step in his career is just continue being a great special teams coach. Corey D. Brian, in contrast to Kelly Air, do you think some of the young, talented players, Colsey, Merriweather, Prince Collie, play significant minutes? I mean, they kind of already starting to get there. I still don't think the offense has played them enough. Defensively, we're seeing that, right? I mean, we're seeing, Prince Colley's a true sophomore that's playing a ton. Gabriel Rubio's a true sophomore that's playing a lot more football. Benjamin Morrison's a starter as a true freshman. Jaden Mickey plays a lot as a true freshman. So defensively, we're already seeing that. I think offensively, it's still an issue, to be honest with you, that they're not playing more of the freshmen. But, a lot of the guys that they're starting on offense are sophomores. Both of their tackles are true sophomores. Their top 2 backs right now are true sophomores. Their leading wide receivers are true sophomore, but that's more out of necessity. If you don't play a sophomore receiver, what else you got? If you don't play a freshman or a sophomore receiver, you don't have really anybody else. Beefeater asks, Brian, do you think DJ throws for another 439 yards like he did in 2020? No, I don't. Brett Lott, should DJ struggle? Does Klubnik create more problems for Notre Dame defensively? I don't think so. Not yet. He will next year when he's the starter next year, but not this year. No, he's a freshman. He's a 185-pound freshman. He'll make some plays, but Notre Dame will make some plays against him as well. So, if they've got to make that move, that's a great sign for Notre Dame. Great sign for Notre Dame. Irish Blooded asks, if you're scheming against Notre Dame, how often would you double cover or triple cover Michael Mayer? Since obviously you would never single cover him. You'd be surprised how many times teams are single covering him. It's like Ryan and I were asking at the game. It's like there was that long pass late in the first half, and it's like, why are you single covering Michael Mayer right now? And then guess what happens? Bam, 37-yard gain, right? I would double cover him constantly because the quarterback's still going to throw to him anyway. At least he has up to this point in time. Look, if I'm a defensive coach, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, make someone other than 87 beat you in the pass game. It's not that complicated because Notre Dame allows it to not be complicated. A-Bent noted ND. Any chance we see Tommy call a draw on third down when the defense drops 8? I'd settle for an angle route out of the backfield at this point. Yeah, you mean like, I don't know, a draw or a mid-zone play like we saw from Syracuse last week that went for first down, or draw on 3rd and 17 that goes for a first down. I think those things only work against the Notre Dame defense. Sure. I mean, if the look calls for it, I don't know if that's a great call against Clemson though, because they're still going to be in 4 down and their D linemen are pretty good at block destruction that they can get off that kind of play. Angle routes are good. I think screens are not bad at all against them. I think there's some shots, there's some seam holes you can find in the seams on 3rd and 8, the way that they cover, that also could work. And there's some downfield high-low concepts that could work against Clemson. They're not a great pass coverage defense, talent-wise or schematically. I think if the quarterback plays well, there's some stuff to be had there. There's no question. All right, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get to all these questions, but I'm going to really try here. Milton Fan 15, Brian, let's see here. Brian, what are some good ways to use Mayer as a decoy to get open? I mean, do the stuff you're doing with him now. Just call routes behind it. We saw an example of it against a good example of it against Stanford, where they were in 12 personnel. They were kind of in a 3-by-1. Mayer was attached. Stanford was in a single high. They basically had Michael Mayer run right across the face of the safety, and that opened up a one-on-one post route to Tobias behind him. They tried to run that play again against Syracuse, and it was there, but there was the false start, and they never really went back to it, which is another puzzling thing. Is run game wise, Tom Reese just runs the same thing over and over and over again. Pass game wise, they don't go back to stuff that was there enough, in my opinion. Like, they ran a comeback early in the game and then didn't do it again until late, and it was a 3rd down late in the game. They could have hit Deion Colsey could have had 9 catches on Saturday. I mean, that comeback route was there all game long. And then you could have countered with something where you could have run a stutter go or something like that once they tried to bite it. But that's the issue. Shamrocker says, did we ever find out what the deal was with Braden Lindsey? Marcus Freeman basically just said he missed too much time in practice because he was sick. And that was what he had said the problem was. Jim Halloran says, Brian, my concern on defense is maintaining rush lanes while trying to get pressure. They have been hurt by quarterback escaping. What say you? Yeah, it's a problem, Jim. There's been times, where you will see this team do things like that very effectively. After the first drive against North Carolina, they did a great job of getting pressure and maintaining gap integrity on pass rushes. It's just about execution. DJ is a big kid. He is hard to bring down from a size standpoint. He's not the athlete that some of the other quarterbacks that they've played. He's not the athlete of the kids they even faced last week, but he can hurt you if you don't have gap integrity. So yeah, we're not Marshall. Brian, in your as your business and platform grows, do you have an opportunity to use another stream service? I'd like to get there at some point. I've contemplated moving away from YouTube. There's just not an option that I'm comfortable with enough yet to do that. I think if I were going to do that, and also like that, those platforms aren't as compatible with StreamYard, which is what we use at this point in time, unless you're referring to StreamYard. But the reason we go StreamYard is it's simplification. There's a lot of other there are other companies like StreamYard, if you're referring to StreamYard, that are there, but it's a lot more expensive and it's a lot more complicated and it takes a lot more work, and I just don't have the time to do all of that. But could we eventually go to something a little bit more technical if we really, really grow and I can hire someone to be a producer? Sure, it's an option, but we're pretty far away from that right now. Milton Fan says, Brian, how the heck did Oklahoma State get shut out by Kansas State? Look, and this is a question that I have about Clemson this week. So I picked Kansas State to beat Oklahoma State last week. I thought it would be a higher scoring game. But one thing that I said in that game, and it's not to act like I predicted a shutout, I didn't. But there was one thing I said is the reason I went with Kansas State is because Oklahoma State had played good game after good game after good game after good game and had to exert a lot of energy into those games. And, the thing for me is like, I just felt they were going to hit a wall. Look at the stretch they had. They had Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Texas, and then you got to go to Kansas State. And then 2 of their previous 4 games were on the road. They had to play at Baylor and TCU. Then they had to go on the road to Kansas State. I just think they hit a wall. They just were gassed. They had played really hard. The last 2 games, they had to come from behind against Texas and come from behind. They had to hold off a rally from TCU. They had to come from behind against Texas Tech. they just exerted a lot of energy. And then I think Clemson's in a similar situation, but what helps Clemson that that Oklahoma State didn't have is Clemson has a bye week to help recover, which should help them to avoid some of the pitfall that we saw from them. All right. Let's get to some more questions here. We have Jeremy Welling. If we lose and it is primarily due to poor quarterback play, do we give Angeli a shot to start at Navy? I don't know, man. Like, what makes you think Steve Angeli is going to be better? I mean, he's coached by the same person. So what makes you think Steve Angeli is going to be better, right? And here's the reality of it. If you go to Steve Angeli, you're going to lose Drew Pine. That's just the reality of it. And what if Steve gets hurt? What if Steve doesn't play well? You're going to go back to Drew Pine, who's got his confidence shook? I mean, I guess we'll address that if it comes. We'll address it if it comes. But at some point in time, can Drew Pine play bad enough to have to put Steve Angeli in the game? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden anything's going to change. I mean, yeah. I don't want to put Steve Angeli in that position, right? I mean, that's just not something I feel comfortable putting him in. Ryan B says, how good is the O-line Clemson has? It's solid. I mean, it's big, it's long, it's solid. It's not great. It's a solid line. I think the right tackle is going to eventually be a really good run blocker. He's already their best run blocker, in my opinion. Jordan McFadden has never become the player I thought he could be after his first year in the rotation. He's not, he's short, but he's got some length. He's not as athletic as I thought he would become. Will Putnam's a nice, tough player. He's solid. Walker Parks is okay. I mean, they're good. They're not great. They're coached well. I mean, they're coached relatively well. They're just not as physical as they should be, in my opinion. But, look, there's a couple guys that I think if Notre Dame is able to have a really good plan that I think they can go after. I think they got to go after the right tackle. Right. Well, I mean, Blake Miller, he's given up 11 pressures this year, and they've got to go after Walker Parks. I think, and those are that's the right side of your line. No, actually, hold on a second. No, hold on. Let me think about this. I think that Walker Parks, that's the right side of your line. Those guys have given up 25 pressures this year, just those two, compared to Notre Dame, whose entire team has given up 35 pressures this year. So I think that's the side you do things with. I think Clemson actually does a decent job of technically handling twists and stunts. They pass that stuff off real well, but that's when they get in trouble, is when you do things like, for me, what I would do if I was Notre Dame is not so much twist and stunt, but like I said, slant and slam. And so you have your defensive linemen slanting, which causes them to turn and then bring your speedy linebackers that way, because they do a good job technically of picking those up, but they're not super fluid guys, and speed can beat them on the outside. So that's something I would like to see. Potatoes O'Brien, they will not be able to move this D-line, average that about 295, far different from the Qs. I think that you're going too far in the opposite direction. Look, they moved BYU, and BYU is really big. This is a better defensive line. Do I think Notre Dame can just line up and run the same offense they did last week? No. Do I think if Notre Dame has the proper game plan and uses formations correctly and they play well, that they can win the battles up front? Yes, I do. I'm not necessarily predicting it, but it's certainly possible. I don't think you're giving the Notre Dame offensive linemen a lot of credit. They average 295, but they only have two guys in the defensive line starting lineup that weigh more than 295. I don't like those average things, because if you got two 300-pounders up the middle and your two ends are 255, which at times it will be, you don't have 295 across the board. You have 295 in the middle, and then you got 255 on the edge. So, but it's not always about just moving them. It's about creating run lanes. It's about getting pins. It's about, pinning the guy inside and getting guys around on the counters and open up run lanes that way. But I think they can. It's just they're not going to be able to do it snap after snap after snap like they did last week. Corey D asked, Brian, in your opinion? In my opinion, Justin A. and Riley Mills have underperformed. Do you agree? Not even close. I don't agree with that at all, especially Riley Mills. If you're not happy with what Riley Mills has done, I don't know what you were expecting. I have no idea. I thought he was really good last week. He was one of their best defensive linemen against Stanford. He had a huge sack, played really well against North Carolina. Thought he was good against BYU. I really don't get it. I don't understand what Notre Dame fans are because you're not the only person that's said this. I've had other people, talk about, oh, Riley Mills hasn't played well. I don't know if you're obsessed with stacks and that's all you look at. I really don't have a clue what you're looking for. I think Riley Mills has been a pretty good football player this year. I really do. Has he been a star? No, he hasn't been a star. He's been a good football player. So I really don't know what it is. I think kid's been a pretty good football player this year. If you look, and I'll say this, Ryan and I have talked about this. NFL teams are very intrigued by what they see from Riley Mills, but I really don't understand it. I watch this kid play every week, and I'm like, hey, he played a pretty good football game. And I mean, if you're someone who cares about Pro Football Focus's data, data numbers, and I don't like them from a grade standpoint, so I don't really care that he's their fourth highest ranked guy there. But I mean, he's tied for second on the team in pressures, and according to Pro Football Focus, he's second on the team in sacks. Again, the one thing I think they're good at is data collection, right? I think they do a pretty good job there, and Riley's there. Justin, just like from a normal NCAA statistics, has 5 sacks. Or actually, no, I'm sorry. Riley is tied with second with Jason with 2.5 sacks. Justin has 2 sacks, so he's not far off of his pace last year. I think he's made some key plays at different times. So no, I mean his sack numbers aren't what they were last year, but he's playing well. I don't know what people are looking for. I really don't. The defensive line has played pretty well this year. I honestly couldn't tell you, Corey, what the disconnect is. I really don't know what that is, but I think Riley Mills has been a pretty good football player this year. I really do. So, and Notre Dame's only 2 sacks off of their pace from last year. If you look at their numbers, I mean, last year was the most sacks they had in a season in several decades, and they're on pace right now for 39, and that would still be them. I mean, if they end up with what they're on pace for now, that's still more sacks than any defense that they've had in 20 years, except for last year's defense. So I think Riley's been good this year. It's been star? No. It's been pretty good? Yeah. Milton Fan, 15. Brian, who from your staff would be the most fun to watch lined up head-to-head with Joe Alt and Blake Fisher? Who would put up the best fight? Probably Ryan. I mean, Sean and I we're pretty old dudes, man. We're both in our 40s. Ryan is still young. He was a defensive player. All of us would get destroyed, right? I mean, that's just a fact. But I would probably go with Ryan on that one just because he's young. But I don't know. Maybe I can go hire some former Notre Dame player to line up against that. If you guys could see what Ryan's doing down in the down there, you'd be laughing right now. Nolan Sanchez, can the corners make good coverage sacks when the D-line can't get home? And can the O-line get a push? That's what I'm looking for. Yes and yes. Can they? Yes. Will they? I don't know. I'm not a psychic. As I've said before, if I knew exactly what was going to happen, I would be a lot richer than I am now, and I would probably be doing some different things with my time. I would be still doing this, but I would be doing other things. I'd hire more people, all that kind of stuff. Can they? Yes. Will they? I don't know. Andrew Rhodes, do you think that next season Notre Dame should hire a quarterbacks coach and have Tommy focus on being an OC if he is with the team next season? I mean, Tommy Reese isn't going to want to give up coaching quarterbacks. And here's the thing: who are you going to get rid of? You can't just hire a quarterbacks coach, and you got to get rid of somebody because you're going to have Tommy Reese on staff just being a coordinator or coaching another position. Who are you going to fire? I mean, who are you going to fire? I think the rest of the offensive coaches in Notre Dame are doing a pretty darn good job this year. You have to fire something. You're going to fire Brian Mason as your special teams coach so you can get an extra position coach? That'd be dumb. So, you got to fire somebody. You can only have 10 assistant coaches. So, you're going to have to figure something else out. Anyway, we'll see. Robert Bishop, the backup quarterback for Syracuse is really good. Why is that kid not the starter? He made some plays, but that kid also made some big mistakes in that game. Why is he not? Look, I'll say this. We see this all the time. NFL's made a living doing this. I could spend the next 20 minutes just naming guys that came in for a game or a couple games in the NFL and did well and then got big contracts and stunk. It's a lot easier to come off the bench when there's no pressure and the other team has a game plan for you to then look good for 2 quarters. But when that kid needed to make some plays late, he couldn't make them. He had some missed opportunities. I mean, he should have thrown another pick. I mean, Brandon Joseph baited him into that go route, picked him off, and that should have been his second interception of the game. Garrett Schrader is also really banged up. So Garrett Schrader's their starting quarterback, and if healthy, he should be their starting quarterback. Does that kid have a chance to be a good player down the road? Sure. But Garrett Schrader was having a pretty good year coming into that game. So, clearly that kid, I mean, he's a young kid. He's, I think, first year in the system. He was at Florida last year, and he's going to need time to develop. Yakov 22, I enjoy your analysis. Thank you. Is that a question? Are you questioning if you enjoy our analysis? I hope not. Does Notre Dame allow you to view the coach's film in the All 22? Notre Dame does not allow me to do that, but I do have access to it through other means. But no, the Notre Dame coaches don't allow me to do that. I wish they would. Keith Wiegand, Brian, do you think it would be better if Reese would be on the sidelines calling plays so he can communicate with Pine? That last thing I want Tommy Reese to do is be in Drew Pine's face after every snap. No, I do not want him on the sidelines. I want him where he is comfortable in the booth, where if Drew doesn't want to talk to him, he doesn't have to pick up the phone, okay? Whereas when, look, the last thing as a quarterback when I played, I wanted is as soon as I get to the sidelines, somebody's in my face talking to me. And that's how Tommy would be. That's his personality. So, no, I would not want that. I would not be a good idea for me. Beefeater, Brian, if we smoke USC this year, do you think Lincoln Riley tries to stop playing Notre Dame every year? No, I don't think so. I think if Lincoln Riley doesn't think he can win at USC, he'll just go somewhere else. But no, I don't think USC will try to stop playing Notre Dame. And it's not Lincoln Riley's call. I mean, the head coach has nothing to do with who they play. It's the athletic director's call. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Thank you for the super chat, sir. Brian, I know Brady Quinn and Pine are tight. Do you think Brady has tried to mentor him not to always look for Mayer? I love having Mayer, but the game plan with Drew is obvious. Thanks, Coach. Love IB. Thank you for the kind words and the super chat. I would hope not, honestly. I'm not a big fan of outside people talking to my players during the season. Off season, that's fine. But during the season, it's like you can't have him giving Pine contradictory information that Tommy Reese is giving him, as much as we may want him to. And he can't spend the time breaking down the opponent's film and doing all those kind of things that he would if he was still playing or if he was coaching. So I think the ways that Brady Quinn can mentor Drew Pine during the season is just the adversity, handling adversity. Hey, man, with the attitude, don't worry about it. Keep battling. You're going to be fine. You got this. I think those are the things that Brady Quinn could and should do. I don't want him telling him who to read or what to look for. That's up to Tommy Reese, because ultimately it doesn't matter what Brady Quinn says. It matters what Tommy Reese calls. Then I think this is the last question here that we're going to get to from Kevin Marzalek. Brian, what do we need to do to fix the defensive red zone issues, have a better nasty streak of opponent score? Have a pretty nasty streak of opponent scoring TDs down there recently. Yeah, Notre Dame has allowed 20 red zone trips this year. Opponents have scored on all 20 of them, and 17 of them have ended in touchdowns. It's bad. I think it comes down to a couple things. I think number one, execution is an issue. Number two, I think that sometimes they have really execution is the biggest one for me. And they had a fourth down call against North Carolina, and Tariq Bracy just overplayed it. You've got a blown coverage not blown coverage, but a poor coverage call and technique conversation that you had with Benjamin Morrison to give up that touchdown. It's just about executing, and I think the defensive line's got to make a couple more plays in the backfield. I think that's really what it boils down to for me, is just you got to execute better. I think the plan can always improve, right? Maybe you bring more pressures. Maybe you do things where you don't give the quarterback time to throw, whatever. But I think those are the primary things for me, is just to execute better. All right, that's going to do it for me, everybody. I appreciate you being in the show today. Appreciate your patience with our technical issues and Ryan not being on for the rest of the show. But I think things went pretty well. So anyway, we're going to be back tonight. So you're going to have Vince, Sean, and Jesse are all going to be on the IB Nation Sports Talk show at 6 o'clock. And I'm going to check right now the time period for the college football playoff show tonight, because we are going to go live at the end of the college football playoff show. Even if Notre Dame is not in the top 25, we're still going to go live because it's college football and it's fun. And you're going to have several Notre Dame opponents. They're going to be in it. We'll talk about that. The show looks like it's going to go from 7 to 8 is when the show is going to be on from tonight. So We will probably go live sometime between 7:30 and 8. Just depends on when they're done. I would say probably 8 o'clock. Let's just plan on 8 o'clock, so that way the IB Nation Sports Talk Show can get done. We'll go live tonight at 8 o'clock. We'll talk about the top 25, what we see, what we think. If Notre Dame is in it, what that means for Notre Dame. If they're not in it, what that means for them the rest of the way. How can they get in? How can they have an impact in this? Because here's the thing. Notre Dame's not going to be a college football playoff team. I mean, I don't even think there's enough craziness that could happen to get them in the college football playoff. Nor should they be. You lost to Marshall and Stanford at home. You shouldn't be a college football playoff team. I don't care what happens everywhere else. However, with USC and Clemson still on their schedule, Notre Dame can have a big impact on who is in the college football playoff. And that's something that obviously we can discuss tonight. So we'll have that 8 o'clock. So 6 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk. 8 o'clock will be us will be Irish Breakdown talking about the college football playoff. So we will see you all then. Thank you for joining us. Again, hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And check us out, obviously, our site out at irishbreakdown.com, of course. And as always, come back and join us again. And thank you all so much for being with us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.